Business events is extremely important to any business, any region, any hotel or travel business. And to do a little workshop today, probably couldn't think of anyone better than Lisa Hopkins, who's the CEO of Business Events Aotearoa. Please welcome on stage, Lisa. Thank you.
As Adrian just explained, I'm the Chief Executive of Business Events Industry Aotearoa, which is the industry body for the business events sector here in New Zealand. And I took on this role on the 3rd of February 2020. They do say timing is everything. So I've known nothing but crisis. And in fact, when we stop being in crisis, because, as we all know, we're not quite out of this yet, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be doing, but I'll have to get my brain into something. I share that illustrious date with Greg Foran from Air New Zealand, Linda Keane, who's the Chief Executive of the Tourism Export Council New Zealand. So, these three brand new sparkling CEOs who had big visions and big ideas and big plans, all starting on the 3rd of February, and then 6 weeks later, how does one fix this? But as I say, my background is this industry. I love this industry, and I think one of the reasons why I love it so much is because I see so much potential. I've sat in many seats in this sector. I've been a supplier, working in convention centres. I've worked in hotels. Does anyone here remember the old Centra? Yeah, SPHC? Yeah, that was me. And I have worked as a client. I've worked as an intermediary. I've worked for government, on government events, and I've worked more recently, before I joined BEIA, is I worked in Singapore for about 8 years as the regional head of a significant meetings and events business, which opened my eyes to so many things. And I guess coming back to New Zealand made me even more determined to say our industry, this little industry called business events, has so much potential, and particularly in a country as magnificent as New Zealand. We just got to get out there. We just got to grip it with both hands. But the good news is we're doing really well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to take you back quite to Business Events 101. So I apologise to all the experts in the room who are sitting there going, yeah, I know that. But I think it's really important to understand it, and especially you need to look at it and understand it from the customer's perspective. And that's what I hope to do today, is to give you a little bit of that insight, so it makes it easier when working with and understanding the client. So the question is, are you ready? And I think if you all said, yes, absolutely, you'd be all fibbing. Not because you want to, but because the world has changed so much, and particularly the sector. So hopefully a little bit of insight into that. Business events were the first to shut because we are the super spreader event. Hope you're all enjoying sitting there tightly, close together. No masks on. How's it feeling? Good. We were the first to shut because we were the first super spreader. I get a little cranky sometimes, and I have shared my crankiness with Wellington when I hear politicians talk about the conference that was held in Queenstown that was the first super spreader event. Business events only had one super spreader event, and it was that conference. It was in February 2020. No one really, we'd only just heard, no one knew where Wuhan was, let alone COVID. And all of a sudden we had a conference in Queenstown, and yes, some of them did end up getting COVID. We haven't had such a magnitude or an outbreak of COVID, except of course under Omicron. I will readily admit, go to a conference today and chances are fairly high you'll come away with COVID if you haven't already. I'm sorry to say, that's just how it is. But fortunately we're dealing in an Omicron environment. We're not dealing in an incredibly serious environment like we were last year. So we were the first to shut. Everyone was very terrified about people being close together. But I've got to tell you, we've also been probably the first to open, which I think has surprised so many people. One of the things that we've been doing is we've been following a lot of what's been said about business travel, because the two have a very natural correlation. So when we see business travel start to ramp up, and here are just some of the headlines that we've been seeing just in the last week or so, a lot of it coming out of IATA's numbers that are telling them that there's this huge surge of confidence back in the business travel sector. That means the corporates are travelling, which means the corporates are bringing people together. And that's always a good sign for us. So when we see that, we start to look at our predictions and we start to think about, okay, what does our future really start to hold? But it's really hard to kind of look into a crystal ball and go, right, what's going to happen? We didn't know. We didn't predict COVID. We didn't predict a war in the Ukraine. We didn't predict inflation or any of these other issues that are going on currently that are all influences, external influences, as to whether or not organisations or associations will use their discretionary funds in such a way of bringing people together. Now, I stand here today, rather, you all sit, I stand here today and I look around and I see a gathering of people who have all come together because they have many things in common. You all work in similar industries or the same industry. You want to hear about new information. That's what a conference is all about. That's what a business event is all about. If you didn't have this, where would you be? Probably feeling a little isolated, I would assume. Perhaps not so as informed as you might like to be. This is where we do get to share information, and this is where experts come up and tell you everything that you ever wanted to know but were frightened to ask about a particular subject. So I think what organisations are starting to see is they're starting to see that they missed that. And I've got a case study at the end of my presentation that I'm going to share with you that tells you why it is so important that one of the things we never, ever, ever should ever stop doing is meeting. So when I looked at the crystal ball and said, right, crystal ball, tell me what's going to happen, I did a few predictions, and yes, I confess that there are a few things in here that I needed to really take a very close look at when I was doing some projections. I was asked to do some projections, and I did it to the best of my ability. The one thing that's really stood out for me in terms of New Zealand's projections up until 2025 and beyond, can I ask, is there anyone here from Christchurch? Okay. How are you loving Tapai? It's awesome, eh? Wellington? Anyone from Wellington? Great. You're next. You're going to feel it. Auckland? Okay, just be patient. It's coming. It's definitely coming. 100%, I can assure you it is coming. I look at those openings, and just recently we were down in Christchurch, beautiful city of Christchurch, where we held our annual trade event called Meetings. And Meetings is a trade show where we bring international buyers together, and the idea is that they come along, they meet, they do business, they go away, exhibitors standing there with a contract in their hand feeling very happy. That's the purpose. I think we did a pretty damn good job this year. We managed to get about $107.5 million worth of business just over 2 days. I'm pretty stoked about that. $107 million. Now that's a record for us. And that's going to continue to evolve and develop over time as those relationships start to develop. So we feel that if business events was a $1.5 billion industry in 2019, we're looking at 2024, 2025 as being when we can get back to some of those numbers. The catalyst to Pai, Takina, NZICC. because what they're doing is they're not only attracting business into those key cities, they're also enabling us to go out to the world to say we've got something special that we think you all need to take a damn good look at, because it's world class, it's first class, it's global, it's big. Although I have to tell you, on the global scheme of things, they're actually quite small, but for our market, they're really big. And we have the infrastructure to support it. We have the hotels, we have the airports, we have the hospitality, we have the attractions, and we have the experts in New Zealand who can help you deliver it. So those are the things that are really going to start pulling business into New Zealand. And the great thing about everyone who comes into New Zealand, our international visitors, they've thought to themselves, well, listen, if I'm going to fly all that way, I might stay. I might stay for a week. Where will I go? Okay, I get it. A lot of people say Queenstown, but we're trying to convince them to go to other places in New Zealand as well. Where will I go? Where will I have a week off? Where will I stay? What will I do? Who will I see? And that's the other part to the sector which isn't talked about quite so much. So we need to get that message out as well. Australia is coming back with an absolute bang. Australia is, now that we've got all of our stoppages at borders and testing and all that sort of thing, now that we've put that to one side, Australia just can't get enough of New Zealand. If you talk to Ross Steele, who, if you were here yesterday, was on the panel with me, he'll tell you he's got about 70 conferences booked into Te Pai for the rest of the year. A good chunk of those have got Australians attached to it, which is really exciting. And we're seeing now that we have this one facility, soon to be two, soon to be three, that when the Australians look at us, they go, you know, we now put New Zealand as part of our rotation for association events, and that's going to be really exciting. The other thing we should think about is for Asia, and this is one thing that I think, you know, the government did incredibly well in 2020, is our response to COVID did actually give us the reputation that we are a safe country, and for our Asian visitors that's really important. It's number one priority, safety. So we expect that when that starts to loosen up, and hopefully one day we'll get China back, you know, sooner rather than later we'll start to see more and more business, especially with these new infrastructure, routes, connections, all of that sort of thing. It's an exciting future. This is my favourite slide. I'd like you all to read that. I'm going to read it out to you one by one. No, the reason I love this slide is because what it tells you is it talks about the integration. Right in the middle, and I think this is really important because you are all customer-focused folk, right in the middle, right in the heart, is the customer. Surrounding the customer is the meeting manager, the PCO, the event manager, whoever it might be. It's around that circle that you see how an event comes together. So if you are in a hotel and you have a conference coming into your hotel and you know that you've got X amount of rooms, X amount of catering, X amount of venue space being used, that's only part of the conversation. All of these industries are involved and engaged, and I think that's the other beauty of the sector, is it is so broad. It just crosses over so many barriers. It's also the reason why I find myself involved in things to do with tourism, trade, economic development, a whole plethora of different associations in industries, because when I look at that circle, I see so many organisations involved. Creatives, web designers, data analysts. My last job, I actually had to hire 3 data analysts into the team back up in Singapore. Never heard of before previously because, hey, we were the good time people. We threw the great parties. Now we have to look at our data and we need to understand that better. So just sharing with you the different event types, and I realise that this is probably the 101 piece, but I think it's really important to understand the differences between them. I start off with the incentive programs, high touch, high value. These guys are looking for everything to be bespoke. Everything should have the individual's name on it. It's because those people who are on that program have done something exceptional. They've either sold a lot, or they've delivered a lot, or they've met certain company values, whatever it might be. An incentive is really the reason why we hear so many incentives going down to Queenstown is because it has an exceptional experience. But we also see a lot of incentives coming into Auckland as well because of the harbour, the wineries, the access. The great thing about incentives is everything is paid for by the organisation. Flights, accommodation, activities, going to restaurants, everything is laid on. So if you're on an incentive and you and your partner have been treated to an incentive in New Zealand, it's not going to cost too much to extend for a week or so and go and check out the rest of the country. That's why we love incentives, apart from the fact they're damn good fun. Trade show. Trade show, very standard. The great thing about the trade show is, and this is what I love about trade shows, you see a trade show, you see a stand, and you see, people interacting, etc., etc. A trade show is an opportunity for smaller businesses to connect directly with their customers. The business that is driven out of that trade show can go into the millions, the billions of dollars, depending on what it is. Some of the trade shows we've had out at the Auckland Showgrounds, for example, huge pieces of multi-million dollar pieces of equipment and machinery. You get a big sale on that, it's huge. The catalyst is that the deal was done at a trade show. It was about bringing people together. An association conference. A lot of these are typically medical, but not necessarily. Association, they've all got something in common, whether it be a particular type of specialism or a particular type of organisational business type. They are typically sponsored, or they will pay for themselves to attend because it's part of ongoing and further education. So you may not see them and I'm just being general here, I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. You may not see them staying at the Park Hyatt because they're on their own, they're paying for their own accommodation. They may be in a 4 or 4.5 star property instead. But they are big. They are big in volume. Corporate conference, well, that's a different story. That tends to be paid by the organisation. Typically, the organiser is from within the organisation itself. That can be good or bad depending on how well trained that person is. And they also have a common goal. It's all about the staff. It could be about trying to motivate staff, setting goals for the year. A conference room is what they're looking for. And a meeting. Well, a meeting is typically just one day and it's just food and beverage and a bit of venue hire, and it's pretty straightforward. But it's really important to understand the difference, and I want to point out to you the incentive piece. Those guys will pay a lot of money for service, for being treated in a particular way. I would highly encourage that if anyone sees the term incentive come through and you need to bid on that, please do not have your banqueting staff include anything to do with weddings in the quote on the way back or the RFP response, because I'll tell you right now, you will be immediately just thrown away. It's bespoke, it takes work, but the rewards are exceptional. When we look at roles and responsibilities, I wanted to highlight that, as you can see from here, it does actually takes a village to pull together an event. And depending on what kind of event it is, depends on which part of the village is included. It's really important to understand the role of the agency and the intermediary, and I'm going to get onto that in a minute. But I did want to highlight to you that, once the customer has made the decision on what they want to do, they typically will hand it over to an intermediary who will then start to bring all the partners together. As I just was talking, I've just been at the hospitality conference and spoke over there and then came over here to talk here. One of the things that we were talking about over there is that there is not, a conference just doesn't happen out of thin air. Adrian, you would agree with that? Yep. It takes time. It takes time. It takes planning. It takes a lot of people to come together. It's a collaboration, and it won't work unless the collaboration has someone who's going to pull everything together and be the conductor, basically. So that's where you have all your supply partners, your convention bureau. There's a lot going on. And if you're in a hotel, what you see is you see your bricks and mortar and you see what's going on within the hotel. What you don't see is everything else that's going on around it. And let me tell you, probably, a hotel might be, say, 30 to 40% of the activity. There's a lot of other things that are happening outside of it. It's always good to know what's going on. So how does it work? And this perhaps illustrates it the best. Here is a 6-step. I could have made this into 9, but I ran out of cute little colours and things. It's 6 steps to actually pulling a conference together. And I looked at this and I said, okay, so where does the hotel fit? Step 1, step 4, and step 5. And in step 1, it's just because we need a quote. We need to get the quote first so we can develop the budget. Frankly, then after that, we really don't need to talk to the hotel that much. Organising a conference or an event goes in a peak and trough type of way. It's all like, you get the business and it's all hands-on and you got to get the budget and the creative and da-da-da-da-da, and your work levels are really up to here. But the conference isn't happening for another 12 months. So you go back into a dive again until you get to about 3 to 4 months out, and all of a sudden it's all on and it's madness and it's crazy and it's insane. So as you can see, the actual event, to my point before, the actual event has many steps and stages to it. What's really important here is to understand the role that you play and the role that you can make the most impact, especially if you're also trying to drive business and revenue back into your organisation. If you're dealing with an intermediary, or if you're dealing with someone from a corporate who's coming to you and saying, can you please help me, I want to put on this event, what you need to be doing, or what I would please be imploring your teams to do, is asking all the right questions. If you don't ask the right questions, you will not deliver a product that you can be proud of. I can assure you of that. But we will talk about that in just a moment. The other question I get asked a lot is, what's the difference between a domestic and an international event? Well, as you can see there, international event is typically is the highest spend. You will be dealing with an intermediary because you are a strange, unknown country, which with strange and unknown pricing language or cultural needs. So you need to know the very first question. If you find yourself dealing with an international event where there is an international intermediary involved, the first thing you should be asking that intermediary is, how do you want me to price? Commission? Net? What are we doing here? Great question to ask, and they will thank you for it. Because the worst thing you can do is immediately go in with a price on the assumption that it includes commission or it doesn't include commission. Because what you don't know is you don't know the contractual agreement between the intermediary and their customer. And I have seen many, many people weep, myself included, when that question hasn't been asked. And you're trying to scramble to find money to pay an intermediary. I'm just going to hurry up here a little bit because I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious of the fact I could talk to you about this for the next 10 hours, which I'm sure you'll be thrilled about. Domestic, very much more straightforward, but some of the questions are a little bit similar. The importance of trade shows, RFPs and FMILs. Look, I'm going to skip over this one pretty quickly because there is something I really want to do a bit more focus on. But all I will say is if you are receiving or recipient of an RFP, read it and answer it as it is requested. The number of times I've seen RFPs responded to, again, with wedding information, I kid you not, that immediately goes in the bin, or don't understand the requirements of that particular event is extraordinary. Ask good questions. Request with the intermediary or the customer, can I speak with you? I have questions I'd like to talk to you. They love that. As you can tell, we like the sound of our own voice. So we've got no qualms in sitting on a phone call and talking to you about what it is that we need. So again, I would implore that this message gets back into those responsible. And as I say, understanding the role of the intermediary, what they do, who hires them, why they can be your best friend or your worst nightmare. Really, it comes down to how you work with them and how you can collaborate with them to solve issues. Because at the end of the day, when the group gets on site or the conference gets on site, your role is going to be to problem solve with that intermediary. Because as we all know, things never always go the way that they're planned to go. That is for sure. I wanted to show you this. This is a case study of a conference that's going to be happening at Tapai later in the year. And the reason why I wanted to show you this is I wanted to give you a sense of value. And this is some assumptive work that we've been doing. This is a medical conference that will be 80% from Australia, 20% from New Zealand at Tapai later in the year, about 750 people. We've projected that the value of that conference, while it is being held, is around $3.75 million. That's for the venue, the auxiliary services, the AV, accommodation, etc., etc. So roughly around that number. We know that in order to deliver that event, we are going to have to directly involve not just the venue, not just the hotels and the airline, but all these other providers. We know that by simply being in Christchurch, we are going to have a direct impact on restaurants, on retail. We know that after the conference is held, that there'll be probably another $1 million or so, it's probably being quite conservative, in additional impact around the region and certainly the South Island as people go off and do their own travel. So they'll be looking to stay in other hotels, they'll be looking to stay doing tourism experiences, hire cars, all of that type of thing. We believe there'll be another $1 million odd. So we're looking at around about, let's just say in round figures, $5 million just out of this one conference in November to New Zealand. Why is it important? This particular conference deals in the impact of hormones, especially on fertility, diabetes type 2, thyroid and stress. We know that in New Zealand we have, unfortunately, 5% of the population suffering from type 2 diabetes. We also have some of the lowest fertility rates at the moment since records were kept. So what this event will do is it will bring together the specialists from New Zealand, specialists and researchers from Australia to focus on this particular subject and to share knowledge and impart new research and understanding. One of the things that this conference is also going to be doing is it will be running a series of workshops prior to the conference actually happening with medical specialists from across New Zealand, where they will get together the weekend before for a special clinical weekend where again they will be sharing new information, new results, new medication, etc., on these subjects. And especially when we know that for type 2 diabetes, it is very prevalent within our Māori and Pacifica population. We know that that is an area that we have to try and help and support. I guess what I'm saying here is if you are involved in this wonderful industry, yes, it has a fantastic economic impact on your business and on our country. But what I love about this industry is it does so much more. It leaves behind legacy. It leaves behind knowledge that we would not have had the opportunity to access. It gives back to both community and to population, to people, to place. And as we move forward, and as I'm speaking to international conference and incentive organisers about coming to New Zealand, the other thing that I'm hearing more and more about is it gives us the opportunity to show the world how unique we are. We are not just a country of beautiful fjords and mountains. We are that, we're lucky, but we're a country of very unique culture. And that's the one thing that no one else can claim from us. So we have a really, really fabulous opportunity to do so much. And thank goodness that we have these wonderful catalysts being opened, soon to be opened, and our magnificent regions to enable us to tell that story. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been useful.
Lisa, thank you very much.